All right. Howdy, everyone. We're having a very cozy day here. It's snowing outside. Actually, I don't think it's snowing now. It has been snowing, but it's one of those cozy days, so it feels nice. Last week, I remember promising that we would start with quote 203, because I never did get to Out of the Stillness and what Out of the Stillness had to say about quote 203. So that's where I'm going to start today. We'll read the quote and then finally go find out what Out of the Stillness says. So this is the quote. It's from Sri Sankara. While the scholar does not overcome his sense of I am this in the body and its faculties, there is no liberation for him, however much he may be learned in religion and philosophy. So again, that's saying this is not an intellectual path, which is really, by the way, since we are about to finish step one, let me just go back and remind you what we are supposed to be learning in step one. Okay, so this is the objectives of step one. Know that a journey that never goes beyond words, ideas, thoughts, or concepts is not a journey to awakening. That's the primary objective. Know that a journey that never goes beyond words, ideas, thoughts, or concepts is not a journey to awakening. And you can see that in quote 203, because it's talking about the scholar, which means the one who's really involved in the intellectual understanding of truth. While the scholar does not overcome his sense of I am this in the body and its faculties, there is no liberation for him, however much he may be learned in religion and philosophy. Right? So we can know, supposedly, that's an air quote, we can know all this stuff in our head, and that's not knowing anything. Because knowing is being. Right? Knowing is being. And knowing it intellectually then is actually not knowing it at all. What do you think of that? So let's go see what happened when I contemplated this back in 2012. Watch carefully for the me sense of I. Am I one with perceptions that are more healed or enlightened than before? Am I one who sees when others don't? If I is identified with this body or with this mind's perceptions or abilities in any way, false I still exists and truth of self has not been realized. I'm going to read that again, and then we'll look at it more carefully, but reading from Out of the Stillness, number 203. Watch carefully for the me sense of I. Am I one with perceptions that are more healed or enlightened than before? Am I one who sees when others don't? If I is identified with this body or with this mind's perceptions or abilities in any way, false I still exists, and truth of self has not been realized. I think that's pretty clear. I don't even feel like I have a lot to say about it. I feel like anything I would say about it is just repeating it, but I like hanging out with things for a little bit, because when we hang out with them, we get the chance to marinate them. So even though I have nothing to say, I'll talk about it anyway. So the false sense of I is this I separate and apart from every other I, every other thing, and often God as well, right? So even as we're awakening, as you know, this progress appears to be made. And I think we talked recently, I think it was here, because I don't think I'm talking anywhere else, so it must have been here. I think we talked recently about there appears to be progress in the darkness, but it's still the darkness, right? Awake is the light, right? So this is really saying that, you know, as I see progress in myself, and I certainly can point to others who are not making that same progress, I'm still attached to the false self. That's what this is saying. Anything that would be true about this being right here, this body, this mind, this personality, and not true about everyone, is an indication of still believing in the false self. You know, you often hear masters say that when you are enlightened, everyone is enlightened. And I remember that used to really throw me for a loop, because I thought, well, Buddha was enlightened, Jesus was enlightened, I sure as hell ain't, you know. So, you know, so how can that be true? But what it's talking about, of course, is their way of seeing, not my way of seeing. You see, we always see the reflection of our own mind or our own way of being. So first of all, if there is legitimate progress, then the way that others are seen is changing too. You know, as one example, I let people know that when you have been healed of the, what I call the I am bad belief, which is unworthiness, guilt, shame, and anything else of that flavor, you don't see it in anyone. That's how you know you're healed. You can't say that I am healed of unworthiness, but she is still very unworthy, right? That means you're not healed. So when you see that you are not unworthy or you are not guilty, you also automatically, there's no thinking to it, you automatically see that everyone else is has no unworthiness or no guilt about them. Like those concepts cease to exist. That's what happens. Not that you can't still use the words and understand what the concepts mean to everybody else, but those concepts no longer exist. So, for example, when I look out at people who are committing crimes or starting wars, or people who are homeless or drug addicted, or, you know, just pick anything typical that other people may judge as unworthy or guilty, that's not what I see. What I do see is people believing, right? That's what I see, is people believing and acting from believing. That's very, very different than seeing someone as guilty, seeing someone as unworthy, seeing someone as shameful, right? So as long as I think I'm different from others, if that's what I see me very clear spiritually, you not so clear. I'm identified with the false self. And I'll tell you another symptom of this. It's kind of a funny symptom, is because you do start to see people differently. And I don't actually associate deeply with a lot of people outside of my own family. Right now, Shauna is probably the person that I associate with the most. And I'm sure she can let you know that's not a lot of hours per week or even per month. You know, it's very, very small. So I don't associate with a lot of people outside of my own family. And what happens is, because, you know, I see the way I see, I actually forget that others don't see like me. And so when somebody says something to me that's completely out of alignment with the way I see, or the way that I think everybody sees, you know, maybe some highly judgmental thought towards another person, I sometimes feel shocked. I sometimes laugh like they're joking, which then sometimes makes them mad. But, my reaction is in one way or another, one of surprise, because I've forgotten about that, right? Until somebody brings it up, I've forgotten about that. And so again, the point is that as long as I can separate myself from others in any way, I am still attached to this as me, this body, this mind, this personality. And the way that you can tell that that is at least fading, progress in the dark, is because the way you see others is also changing, right? That's the key. That's the key. So watch carefully for the me sense of I. Am I one with perceptions that are more healed or enlightened than before? Am I one who sees when others don't? If I is identified with this body or with this mind's perceptions or abilities in any way, false I still exists. And the truth of self, we could also say the truth of one, has not been realized, right? The truth of one has not been realized. So let's move on to 204. Starting with the 7 steps to awakening. Reality can be experienced only with the eye of understanding, not just by a scholar. What the moon is like must be seen with one's own eyes. How can others do it for you? Oh, this just makes my heart sing. Maybe that's not fully understandable to everyone, but a very long time ago, I don't even remember how many years ago, I prayed a prayer that went something like, I am done with intellectual understanding now. I only want direct experience. And I am grateful for the ones that I have learned from, for the teachers that I have learned from. But I also chose to some degree to ignore my teachers because I want to learn from myself. Notice I said to some degree to ignore my teachers. In other words, if a teacher recommends like awareness, watching awareness meditation or self-inquiry, or as Nisargadatta Maharaj says, focusing on the I am presence. If the teacher recommends a practice that feels like, yeah, that, I feel the yeah inside. Yeah, that feels like that makes sense. Yeah, then I'm willing to trust the teacher enough to practice it. But when the teacher starts telling me, about their experience and about, what enlightenment is, that's what I mildly hear and ignore. So what I take from the teachers are the practices that sound useful. What I leave behind are the ideas of enlightenment. And that's because I don't want to become an intellectual idea-er. I don't know what idea, like I don't know, I'm making up a word here, but a person who is totally connected to their ideas and think that they know truth. So I prayed, I only want direct experience. And that to me that prayer is completely sacred. In fact, I have also prayed that I only want to know truth. Even if truth is you're born and then you die and that's all there is. I want to know that. I don't want to be fooled into believing anything that isn't true. Why would I want that? Why would I want to believe something that wasn't true? And adults are very, very good at that, which is always funny. It's like we never stop actually being children. We just get bigger and then older. but we keep right on pretending and believing our own pretending, right? So my prayers are about, give me direct experience, give me truth. And even if the truth is disappointing because I was hoping it was something else, give me truth. So again, the quote says, reality can be experienced only with the eye of understanding, not just by a scholar. What the moon is like must be seen with one's own eyes. How can others do it for you? And another example that we often hear about is like tasting. Like if somebody has never had watermelon, you know, you can try and describe for them what watermelon is like. It's very watery, you know, it's got a little bit of crunch to it, but, you know, and you know, it's very sweet. But some people like to put some salt on it to add a little saltiness to it. But if they've never tasted watermelon, they just can't know. They can't. It's impossible. There's no way you can describe it for them, no matter how hard you try. The only way to know what watermelon tastes like is to taste watermelon. And this is saying this is the same as about truth or about self-realization. The only way we can know what it is to find out for ourselves. Right? It's the only way. Thinking we know is not knowing at all, which again, that's the objective to step one, is to realizing that, you know, you can't find it through concepts, through ideas, through mind. So let's see what I wrote in the journal, number 204. Awakening is a process of self-realization. Therefore, awakening involves delving deep into oneself, deep into the mind and heart, searching the bottomless, clear waters for a realization that cannot be taught or given by another. It must be realized for oneself. Spend time alone in heart-guided search. Now, you know I love that sentence. If you know anything about me at all, you know I love that sentence. Spend time alone in heart-guided search. Let the world go and dive deep into the unknown waters. You will not reach bottom, but you will see and understand. And then the peace that comes from knowing dawns. I think this sentence, although this is all very symbolic, I think this sentence that I wrote, you will not reach bottom, is a really important sentence. Because what the mind expects is a conclusion. Closed. I know what the truth is now, right? A conclusion. And what this is saying is there's not actually a conclusion. It's not anything that mind would expect. Mind expects a conclusion, a final knowing. And that's not actually what the truth is. And I think I've told you all before that Bernadette Roberts, in her attempts to describe what it's like to eat watermelon, or in her attempts to describe truth realization, she says that it's entirely different than our dimension of knowing. But then she says the thing that in our dimension that is most like it is not knowing. You see how different that is from a conclusion, right? So mind expects that I will figure out, I think mind expects that I will figure out what I am, and it will be concluded. And that's not what this is. So that's an idea that we can throw away, the idea that somehow knowing the self or knowing the truth is a conclusion. Although that makes sense to the mind. To the mind, you don't, if it's not concluded, you don't know it, right? But this isn't about the mind. So that's something that we can throw out, that there will be a conclusion. And anyone who feels they have reached a conclusion are actually still at the level of intellect. Right? So awakening is a process of self-realization. Therefore, awakening involves delving deep into oneself, deep into the mind and heart, searching the bottomless, clear waters for a realization that cannot be taught or given by another. It must be realized for oneself. Spend time alone in heart-guided search. Let the world go and dive deep into the unknown waters. You will not reach bottom, but you will see and understand, and then the peace that comes from knowing dawns. The peace that comes from knowing dawns. Again, a paradox to the mind. If there's not a conclusion, it means you do not know. That's just the mind that thinks that, right? You do know, even though there's never a conclusion. Manuela sent me a book. I heard she mentioned it in Clarifying the Teachings on Sunday night. It's a Robert Adams book, Silence of the Heart, Part 2. She said that she thought it might be part of the book, Silence of the Heart. I think it's actually a different book. I haven't gone downstairs and pulled out Silence of the Heart to verify that, but I've read Silence of the Heart a couple of times, and this isn't sounding familiar, so I think it might be a different book. But again, I haven't verified that. But since she gave it to me, I've been reading it. And one of the things that Robert Adams is talking about in this book, he calls it the three vehicles. The three vehicles which carry you into the land of self-realization. The first vehicle will not surprise you. You have a deep feeling, you have a deep longing, a deep feeling to be by yourself. That's the first vehicle. And I know that, some weeks ago I talked about that. I talked about how important it is to take time by yourself. And this is what he says. This is the first of the three vehicles. But notice he says this comes up as a deep longing, a deep feeling, which means that it occurs naturally. Whatever these words mean, pardon the language, because I feel like the words are kind of BS, even as I'm about to say them. But as you're getting closer and closer to self-realization, whatever the heck that means, as you're getting closer and closer to self-realization, you crave more and more time alone. In fact, 6 weeks ago, when I divided my days into 3 8-hour periods, one of which was 5 to 1, primarily for meditation and contemplation and the necessary activities of the day. That sounded like a lot, because before, when I was working as the founding minister, I had to quit by 10 a.m. in order to get to my work, right? And so now I was getting to go all the way until 1. You know that 1 o'clock is coming earlier and earlier every day? Suddenly 8 hours isn't looking like enough time. Now it is what it is for right now, but it's that wanting to be with this, whether it's through meditation, whether it's through contemplation, or even whether it's through some type of inspirational reading, wanting to be with this all the time. Just like you want to be with your lover all the time. It's no different, right? This is a natural thing that arises. And so this is what he calls the first of the three vehicles. You have a deep feeling. You have a deep longing, a deep feeling to be by yourself, right? And then he talks about that. I'll go ahead, since I mentioned it, I'll just read the second and third vehicle really quickly to you. The second vehicle is you have a deep feeling, a deep desire to always be at satsang. But then he says satsang is not just a spiritual meeting. And he asks people what satsang is. And the conclusion they come to is abiding in the self. Because the word satsang, from what I've been told, I'm not a language expert, but the word satsang literally means being with the divine. Right? That's what the word literally means. So you start having this deep longing to be with the divine all of the time, which means if you have divided your days into 3 8-hour periods, when you get up at 1 o'clock and you go into whatever your worldly tasks are, you don't forget the self. Once upon a time, you did. I mean, once upon a time, back when I started the spiritual path, especially, I would get up. I had to start getting ready for work at 6. So I would get up at 4 and I would spend 2 hours, in contemplation. I didn't meditate then, but 2 hours in contemplation and journaling. And then when it came time to get up and go and I got to work, I would go hours not even thinking about truth. I mean, just totally caught up in the world again, right? Because, you could say there was still an attraction to the problems and concerns of the world and trying to work everything out and have control and get it to go my way, right? That was still a very strong attraction. What he's saying is that attraction shifts at some point. At some point, you don't have the desire for that anymore. At some point, even though this body still needs to get up and go do things, you want to get up and go do those things with the divine. Right? You want to stay with that focus, stay with that contemplation. This is what you want. Nobody's making you do it, right? You always want to be in satsang. So the first thing is you want to be alone. And the second thing is when you can't be alone, you still want to be focused on the divine. And then the third thing, which to be honest, I don't really have this particular longing. And actually, when I read about him, he didn't either before. So I'm not sure why he mentions this as the third vehicle. But he says you will have a deep feeling, a deep desire to be around people like yourself. Now, maybe to some degree I have this. So let's talk about that. He says, in other words, your old relatives, your old friends, your old cronies that you used to drink with, get high with, or whatever you did with them, those things don't turn you on anymore. You want to be with spiritual people like yourself. Now, and he says, you're not putting it on, you're not intellectualizing it, right? This is just where you want to be. Maybe why this is different for me. Part of this is certainly true. I have no desire to go out with people and drink. I mean, not that I don't have a beer every now and then or wine every now and then, don't get me wrong. But, the way of going out and drinking beer and dancing and or whatever you do to seek the thrills in the world. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in seeking thrills from the world anymore. Maybe that's the way I should say it. Not that I still don't go out and do things. I still go hiking. I still go kayaking. I still go, to plays. I still go out to dinner with my family. But for me, that's just doing what it comes to me to do. That's different than that seeking from it. Because that's how I get my fulfillment, right? So in that way, maybe that's where the third vehicle, maybe I would have expressed it differently than he is. He says you don't want to be around with those people you partied with anymore. Well, I haven't partied in a long time. He's saying you don't want to be around those people you partied with anymore because partying doesn't interest you. Instead, you want to be around people who are also interested in truth. Maybe he's an extrovert. I don't know that for a fact, but extroverts like to be around people either way. My personality is more of an introverted personality. So maybe that's why I would express the third vehicle differently. What I would say is you no longer want to get anything from the world. There's just nothing you want to get from the world anymore. You just want to be. no matter what it's bringing you to be with, right? You know, you guys know that I've been working with that audio on surrender. And one of the things I did was listen to the audio and take notes. And of course, the notes I took, as you know, were the notes that were most meaningful to me. That's what we do when we take notes, or we highlight, right? So let me just read to you some of the things that I have written down that were meaningful. Trust God. Abide by the will of God as it is given. Do not make a grievance of what does not please you. Trust God. Abide by God's will, whether God appears or vanishes. Await God's pleasure. God knows what is best and when and how to do it. Leave everything entirely to God. You no longer have any cares or concerns. That is just a different expression of, I don't want anything from the world. Right? That's all that is. Listen very carefully again. Trust God. Abide by the will of God as it is given. Do not make a grievance of what does not please you. Trust God. Abide by God's will, whether God appears or vanishes. Await God's pleasure. God knows what is best and when and how to do it. Leave everything entirely to God. You no longer have any cares or concerns. That deeply describes the way I feel about all of the goings on in my life. They're happening. I'm willing to let them happen. I have no problem with the way they're happening. I don't want them to happen differently, right? So that attitude is probably more what I would have described as the third vehicle. Notice it doesn't involve the word people. It's more involves the word the world, right? Which of course people are part of the world. But I no longer want to get anything from the world. Instead, I want to just be with whatever comes, right? So 3 vehicles. Again, Robert Adams says the first one is you have a deep longing to be by yourself, and I second that. The second vehicle is you always want to be in satsang, which means you want to abide as the self all the time. You may not be successful at it, but that is your deep longing, right? That's where your ambition is, you could say. I second that. And then the third one is you no longer want to be with those people who are living, in the world. Instead, he's really saying you want to be with people who aren't living in the world. And I just took the people out of it. I said that for me, I don't want to get anything from the world anymore. I just want to be with whatever comes, right? So again, if we go back to the quotes that we are looking at, it's quote number 204. Reality can be experienced only with the eye of understanding, not just by a scholar. What the moon is like must be seen with one's own eyes. How can others do it for you? And then from out of the Stillness, awakening is a process of self-realization. Therefore, awakening involves delving deep into oneself, deep into the mind and heart, searching the bottomless, clear waters for a realization that cannot be taught or given by another. It must be realized for oneself. Spend time alone in heart-guided search. Let the world go and dive deep into the unknown waters. You will not reach bottom, but you will see and understand. And then the peace that comes from knowing dawns. All right, let's move on to 205. 205 says, speech alone, even a deluge of words, with scholarship and skill in commenting on the scriptures, may achieve some personal satisfaction, but not liberation. And in fact, I think personal satisfaction is what you get out of that. I think that there's like this puffed up feeling, right? When you know it all, when you say that's what comes with knowing it all, this puffed up feeling. So that's all you get out of it is self-satisfaction. So speech alone, even a deluge of words with scholarship and skill in commenting on the scriptures may achieve some personal satisfaction, but not liberation. So 205 and out of the stillness. To study and discuss is not to even step in the pool of self-discovery. If one will not go into the pool in focused investigation, how can one discover what the waters of self teach? One must abandon study and dive deep into the self with nothing but intuition as guide. Again, that says it all. Let me read it again. To study and discuss is not to even step in the pool of self-discovery. If one will not go into the pool in focused investigation, how can one discover what the waters of self teach? One must abandon study and dive deep into the self with nothing but intuition as guide. I mean, you guys could like cut that out and post that on your bathroom mirror. That's kind of like a how-to. I have read far fewer books than the average spiritual student. And of even the ones I have read, there's a smaller subset of books that I have read and contemplated multiple times. So it's like there's this small group of books that are my guides. And all of the other books I don't need. And it's kind of funny because I've had this pattern of sometimes somebody tell me about a book, like, okay, I'll buy that. And then it just sits there on my bookshelf for years. And then I end up donating it. Like it never even gets opened, you know. Also, people give me books. I think, okay, that's sweet. Maybe I'll read that. And I put it on my shelf and it sits there for years. And then finally, one day I donate it. So the truth is, we actually need very little from the outside. I think that's what this is really pointing to. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there. Some of it is probably trash, you know, just trash. If you're looking for truth, right? It's not truth. So it's just trash. Some of it is good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's for you. It's for somebody else, right? So it's intuition that lets us know which of this multitudes of books, which ones are for me. And then those may be actually read and contemplated multiple times, right? Because that's all I need. We each need very little. So letting intuition guide you. I mean, you know pretty quickly if you open a book and it's not for you. In fact, Michael Langford gave me this book. He handed this to me when I was with him out at his house. And it sat on my bookshelf for years. I never opened it. You can tell how new it looks. And then recently, a student of Michael Langford, you know, Michael Langford only has, and there may be thousands of people that listen to him, but he only has 1, 2, 3 and a half, 4 students. that I can think of, unless I forgot someone. And one of those people contacted me recently, and we talked for about an hour, and he mentioned this book. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll pull it out. Maybe the fact that it was given to me by Michael Langford, and the fact that, he has mentioned it, he commented, I showed him mine, he commented how used his looked, how new mine looked. So maybe I'll pull it out and I'll read it. And I did, I opened it randomly and I did some reading. You can see there's a little bit of underlining there. But it almost as soon as I finished reading that day, I actually felt done. So this is not one of those books for me. However, this book, look at it. Look how used it looks, if you were to go through it, you're going to find all kinds of circles and stars and marks and this book apparently is for me. I mean, that's why I'm teaching from it right now, right? It's been used multiple times and may continue to be used multiple times, along with my journal. Even my journal is still very, very meaningful to me. So it's about knowing the difference between this was very valuable to Michael Langford, and it was very valuable to this student of Michael Langford's, but it's not for me. And so this is what we have to know. Which books are literally my food? Which ones are my food? And then again, we maybe go through those same books multiple times. We'll know when we're done with them. And sometimes you think you're done, you put it back on the shelf, and 2 years later, your hand's grabbing it again. It's time to go back, right? So the difference is the books that are for us are not leading us to study and discuss. The books that are for us are leading us to look. That's the difference. Like when we're reading them, when we're contemplating them, looking is happening, right? That's what's going on. Looking is happening. And because those books are leading us to look, those books have great value, not just the ones that we would read and understand or discuss. So to study and discuss is not to even step in the pool of self-discovery. All those other books we can forget about. They're literally a waste of our time. Somebody else may love them. That's great. That's great. We want them to have their books, right? But that doesn't mean that I have to read them too. So to study and discuss is not to even step in the pool of self-discovery. If one will not go into the pool in focused investigation, how can one discover what the waters of self teach? One must abandon study. Believe it or not, with this book, I abandoned study. Isn't that funny? One must abandon study and dive deep into the self with nothing but intuition, which tells you which books are yours, with nothing but intuition as your guide. So it's not intellectual. But even though it's not intellectual, that doesn't mean that part of your teacher may not come through book, right? But you can tell the difference. You can feel the difference. It's that God feeling I've talked about before that guides you into the books you need to be in. Also pay attention to when you're feeling that you're reading too fast, because you are. Slow down, slow down, slow down. The mind, that same mind that likes the conclusion, it wants to get to the end of the book, right? That's not the job. George cracked me up. I don't know. He was teaching some time ago in the last couple of weeks. And he was talking about doing the work. And he had the paperback copy of Out of the Stillness, which I don't have, but it's like this thick. And he said, who does the work? Yeah, there he goes. He's holding it up now. He said, who does the work? Regina did the work. And he holds up that book, because it's so thick. But do you know, it took me 8.5 years to do that. It wasn't fast. That's why also, if you read the book, you'll witness a maturation process. You'll witness that the finish of the book is different than the start of the book, than the mind, right? The start of the book. There's a, it happened because I wasn't writing a book. In fact, I had no idea it would ever be published. That idea didn't come till late last year, I think. I was not writing a book. I was focused on looking. The writing was a part of the looking process, right? So that's the pool of self-discovery, is the looking. And it's not trying to rush through a book. It's not trying to know everything in the book. It's just letting the book be the catalyst for the looking. And it's okay to go slow. It's okay if you take 15 years to go through your book, as long as the looking is deep and thorough, right? That's what counts. So the next quote that I have is 206. The tangle of words is a great forest which leads the mind off wandering about. So wise men should strive to get to know the truth about their own nature, right? So words, wrong way, strive to know the truth of your own nature is what this says. The tangle of words is a great forest which leads the mind off wandering about. No wise man would want that, right? That's just a forever, forever journey. The tangle of words is a great forest which leads the mind off wandering about. So wise men should strive to get to know the truth about their own nature. You know what this really reminds me of is in the Bible, when Jesus said something about the narrow path to heaven or life and the wide path to destruction, right? You guys, if you know the Bible, you might remember that scripture. This really says the same thing. This says words, however, because we're really in step one. This is saying words, study, getting to know things intellectually is that wide path into destruction. It's this forest where you just wander around lost all the time. It also points out that striving to get to know the truth about your own nature, studying your own self, looking here at your own self, that's really the narrow path. That's the direct path, is the words that we often hear. Right? Self-attention is the direct path. How many books do you need for self-attention? Well, you do need some, if you're anything like me, because, on day one of my spiritual path, April, whatever, 2004, if I had read, I think Michael Langford jokes about a book, and I don't remember exactly what he says those sentences may be, but like if you had a book that was 250 pages long, and on every page it said something like self-attention is the direct path to liberation. The people would want to read that book because it says the same thing on every page, even though that's the truth. But the truth is, if I had read that book, I wouldn't have known what the heck it meant. I wouldn't have known what those words, self-attention is the direct path to liberation, meant. So the books that I have spent time with have brought me to that understanding, right? So we do need to be taught to some degree, but we also need to know when we're at the end of the teaching. There does come a point, and chances are we've all reached it already, where it doesn't matter what book you pick up. If it's a good book, it's going to say the same thing, right? It might use slightly different symbols, have a slightly different way of expressing it, but there's nothing new under the sun at some point in the really good books, right? So if you're reading the good books and you are still kind of learning, then you're still in that process of being educated to understand the practice, if that makes sense, right? You're being educated to understand the practice. But once that education is complete, there's nothing new in any of those books. So guess what step you're at now? The practice. You understand the practice. Now it's time to do the practice. And you still may use books to daily inspire you. I was listening to an audio about a week ago. It was another Ramana Maharshi audio on surrender. And this person was talking about Ramana Maharshi. It wasn't Ramana Maharshi's words. But this person said that Ramana Maharshi recommended setting aside time for self-investigation, self-inquiry. And I'm sure he recommended this to someone, even though I never heard this recommendation. I'm sure the guy didn't make it up. He probably heard him say it to someone. Set aside a certain amount of time for focused self-inquiry practice. Spend half of that time in direct self-inquiry practice, and spend the other half of that time reading books about self-inquiry. That's what this guy said, Ramana said. The reason that stood out to me is because that's kind of what I do. I was like, well, isn't that interesting? Because when I get up in the morning, I like to have coffee. So, for the first hour from 5 to 6, I'm sipping coffee and I'm reading something. Sometimes it's my own journal out of the stillness. Right now, the last few mornings I've been reading from this book that Manuela sent me, Robert Adams. It's whatever I'm guided to. But I'm reading, and sometimes some journaling comes into it. Sometimes there's some journaling that comes into it too, right? But there's a reading, maybe some journaling, very slow, very contemplative, but reading is happening. And then when the coffee's gone, I shift to the meditation, right? And I meditate up until I need to walk the dog. And as you guys know, that's been slipping a little bit lately. I think this morning it was 10 o'clock when she got out there. But as I was telling Shauna, by the way, I saw Shauna the other day, I said, please don't think my dog is suffering when her walk is slipping, even if she's barking at me, because she's got a doggy door over there. She really has to go to the bathroom. All she has to do is go outside. So, so I'm not torturing my dog. But then after I walk her, I have breakfast. I typically, not always, but I typically go back to some type of reading or listening. Like lately, I've been listening to that audio on surrender and taking notes and contemplating that. Sometimes I go back into meditation. But if you take the hour before and the hour after the walk, and then you take the 2 to 2.5 hours of meditation, notice I'm pretty much splitting it in half. I'm spending half of my time in direct spiritual inquiry and half of my time in reading. The other part of the time is the necessary activities of the morning, walking the dog, taking the shower, some days getting a little bit of exercise. Actually, it's turned out to be about 2 days a week when I go to the gym, because I am more interested in the spiritual stuff. But I do make it down there a couple days a week. I haven't made it down there yet this week. Maybe today, we'll see. But again, what this shows is that books do have some value. First, they educate us on the practice. Then they inspire us to practice with zest. When I read or listen to the audios that I'm reading or listening to, when I'm doing that, it is building up enthusiasm. So that when I go into the meditation, the self-inquiry practice, there's an eagerness, like I really want this, because the reading or the listening has built up that enthusiasm. So we don't want to misunderstand this whole message about it's not intellectual. We don't want to misunderstand this as ignore the books, because the right books still have their place for us. Right? The right books still have their place for us. So again, 206, the tangle of words is a great forest which leads the mind off wandering about. So wise men should strive to get to know the truth about their own nature. And all my journal says, it's very short, which is good because we only have 4 minutes. All my journal says is, hear me well. The answer is within. If you want to know, use time to look there. Right? Hear me well. The answer is within. If you want to know, use time to look there. So again, we're not going to get the answer from books or teachers. We're not going to get the answer from books or teachers. But in the first phase, books and teachers can teach us how to practice. Remember, I said when it came to my teachers, I threw out their descriptions of self-realization and stuff. I've thrown that out. What I kept from them was the practice instructions. Okay. So one value books and teachers have is teaching us the practice instructions and understanding what those practice instructions mean so that we can practice. Like when I went to driver's ed, I don't know how driver's ed was in your school, but in my school, it was 2 semesters in high school. The first semester was all book. We were learning all the rules of the road and all that, right? We studied first on how to drive. Then we got behind the wheel and we began to drive. It's the same thing, right? So there may be some study first so that you learn the practice instructions, but then you get behind the wheel and you focus on the practice instructions. But even then, because the ego doesn't want us to be enthused, the ego has resistance. The ego says, I don't like to meditate. I'd rather do this or this or this or whatever the ego says, or I'll never be good at meditation or whatever the ego says. We still need something to inspire us, to enthuse us. And so then the right books can really make us enthusiastic about the practice. And as you can imagine, approaching the practice enthusiastically has a lot more value than, okay, it's time to meditate, right? Right? You come into it with your heart open, you're enthusiastic, you want to give your best. That's the role that books and teachers can play even after we've learned. But we want to make sure we're spending at least half of our time in the actual practice. Right? At least half of our time, the time that we have to be alone in the actual practice. Because the books, the learning piece is behind us. The books can't give us any more knowledge. We've gotten all we need from them. We have everything we need from them. Now it's the practice, and then just the encouragement is all that we need. Okay? All right, so we do still have 2 more quotes in step 1. So next week we will come back and we should be able to finish step 1 next week. We'll start with quote number 210, and I'll see y'all around. Bye.